All right. Welcome, everyone. We are going to go ahead and call the Senate Committee on Revenue and Economic Development to order. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Senator Spearman, Chair Neal.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mark, Senator Gansert present as she walks in, and Senator Spearman present whenever she arrives. And I'll change it later if neither one show up.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so today we just have a single presentation, and it will be from GoEd. And we have our presenters at the table, and you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, I'm Tom Burns. I'm the Director of the Governor's Office of Economic Development. Thank you for having me here today. Seated next to me, I have Deputy Director Bob Potts, and to my left, I have Melody Sheldon, Senior Director of Development. Ready?
Ready.
All right.
Okay.
So, as we go through today, we're going to give you a high level of the operations of our office. We wanted to review how economic development affects our state's economy, its structural dynamics, our unique characteristics, its regions, and how the pandemic during the downturn forced us to look abruptly towards restructuring our economy here in Nevada. We look forward to working with you as we deal with the challenges and opportunities here in our state. As we look forward to the director's update, here's our story and vision. The pandemic gave us the opportunity and/or forced us to look towards the diversification of our state and the results and consequences of us being so heavily dependent on tourism in our state, in the state. And so as we go forward, we strive to be innovative with some strategic growth that looks towards to EVs, electric vehicles, and the lithium loop. Innovative Nevada includes coordination, capital, higher education. Our pro-cyclical economy left us vulnerable to the downturn during the pandemic, and these items will give us more ballast as we choose to move forward. We're striving to diversify all regions. Currently, Northern Nevada has done a much better job in diversifying their economy than we've experienced in Southern Nevada, and certainly one of our focuses will be providing that ballast and that diversification towards Southern Nevada. We need to be clear about what our constraints are, however. We need to manage our lack of water, challenges around land, and our workforce as we move forward. Since 2019, the GoEd board has approved incentives of 90 companies. In the past 5 years, these companies have added 13,900 jobs, approximately $850 million in annual wages, and a capital investment of $3.8 billion. In the next 10 years, these companies will generate more than $1.5 billion in new tax revenues for the state of Nevada. So how have our tax incentives impacted the state of Nevada? These slides are incentivized companies only, and none of them have withdrawn and reflect the return on investment for our state based on what our investment is as a state. As you can see, we've in the last 12 years, we've abated approximately $2.1 billion in taxes, but that's resulted in a net cash inflow for the state of taxes of $5.1 billion. Further, you can see in this slide as we move forward that the number of jobs that have been impacted is fairly significant within our state. Over 26,500 contracted jobs are participating here, and you can see that the hourly wage of the incentivized companies is clearly above our state average as we move forward. I'm now going to defer to Mr. Potts to present the following section.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Bob Potts. I'm the Deputy Director in the Governor's Office of Economic Development. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having us. So I'm going to take a little bit of a different twist, and I'm going to build on some of the comments that Director Burns mentioned just a bit earlier when he had his story slide up there talking about economic development and Nevada's changing economy and the significant changes that we've seen in the past. Some of the effects that the pandemic has had on us, and some of the current structural changes that have happened that have really created kind of a wind at our back for economic development and strategic investments going forward. So what I want to do is I'll start with this slide here as talking at a high level about where we stand. You can't know where you're going if you don't know where you are and where you've been. So that's where I want to start with this conversation. So we're currently sitting at about 1.5 million workers in this state. That's 26,000 above the pre-pandemic peak. As we all know, back in April of 2020, we dropped off roughly 333,000 jobs and had that almost 30% unemployment rate. We all know that that was largely tied to the exposure of the service-based industry. And when you look at the difference between the leisure and hospitality industry in the South compared to the North, roughly 29% of all the jobs are directly tied to leisure and hospitality in the South, and roughly 16% in the North. That differential there made a huge difference in resiliency, and it's part of the goal of what we want to continue to move forward in the state across the state, not just from one region to the next, but it creates an opportunity, taking the template that we've had and operationalize it in other places as we start going forward. As I mentioned, right now we're, as of December, we're up over 26,000 jobs from the pre-pandemic peak, but we're still down 19,000 jobs in the leisure and hospitality industry. So there's obviously a structural change that's going on in the industry base, and largely that's happening in the South. If we look at the state unemployment rate, right now it's at 5.2%. That's a low unemployment rate, but it's still high compared to what it is at the national level. It's obviously lower in the North than it is in the South, and some of that is still the tailings that we're dealing with in Southern Nevada. A lot of folks will ask me, are we going into a recession? Where are we at in this? And it's hard to go into a recession when you have that full of employment. And when we right now have roughly one or two, for every 2 openings, we only have 1 available unemployed person. And when that's the case, it's very difficult to go. You can't really have a recession when the employment base is that tight. So I want to go to the next slide. Okay, this map here. So I want to talk a little bit about our pro-cyclical economy and how we compare with our neighboring states and the ones that we compete with most of the time, with Utah, Arizona, and Colorado. What I'm looking at here is the old Hockman Index. And essentially what it says is if the Hockman Index was at 100%, your industry base would be perfectly diversified. All the slices of your pie would be the same size. As you can see, when we look at Utah, it's at 95.5%, Arizona's at 95.9%, Colorado at 94.2%, and we're not even at 74%. So that's part of why Nevada always has historically and continues to have higher highs and lower lows. When things are good, they're really good. When they're bad, they're difficult. So that's part of what we're trying to do on the diversification side of things. If we look at counties within the state, and again, this is another data indicator of why things were differently and how they were imbalanced during the economic downturn as a result of the pandemic. 90% roughly of is what it is in Washoe County, 64% in Clark County, and then as you start going out into our rural counties, they get to the place where they're almost exclusively dependent on mining. Okay, and the mining industry has been very strong and it's been good for us, but they're still all have their eggs in that basket. If you pull mining out of our rural communities, they are really challenged. So that's another aspect that we look at, and it's really important for us as we work with our regional development authority partners. They're the boots on the ground. They know what's going on, and so we can execute as needed for those different communities. I'm going to move through these next slides fairly quickly because, but I think they're really helpful. If we go to the next slide, Mel. These bubble charts, and you may or may not have seen these before, but I think they're a great way to express from a data perspective what's happened over the last decade with economic development in the state of Nevada. Essentially, to keep this simple, anything above that horizontal line means we have a higher concentration of workers in that industry than the national average. Anything below, we have a lower concentration of workers. If anything's to the left of the vertical line, it means that we're growing slower than the nation is in that industry. Anything to the right means we're growing faster. Okay? That means we can divide this into quadrants like this. The size of the bubble refers to the number of jobs. And as you can see in the upper left, that mature quadrant, it's growing slower than the national average, but we're still 2 times larger than the national average. If we go to the right, upper right, that's mining. That's a star. It's over 3 times larger than the national average, and it has grown significantly over the last decade, but it's only 15,000 jobs. What matters is what's in that lower right-hand quadrant. That's the industries in our target sectors, and they're moving to the right and up. They're migrating to the right and up, and this is happening at different paces across the state and different regions in the state. So if we look at southern Nevada on the next page, it doesn't look a lot unlike the state, and you wouldn't expect it to because 75% of the population is in southern Nevada. If you go to the next slide, however, this is northern Nevada, and there's right there, we actually have 4 stars right now with logistics and operations, aerospace and defense, manufacturing, as well as natural resource technologies, which includes the clean energy side of things, water technologies, and agriculture. When you get in that lower left quadrant, that's a concern. That's when you're below the national average and you're losing ground. And what's going on here is because our primary industries are growing so fast that the secondary industries are having a harder time keeping up. But they'll catch up, okay? And that's what we have with the healthcare and the technology. The other thing I want to point out is in the data table on that far right column, that's the average wages of these industries. So we're getting a double upward. So we're helping as we diversify our economy, we're diversifying into industries that tend to pay more than the industries where we're losing ground in. Okay, to keep in mind. So that's kind of the history, what's happened over the last decade. This horizontal bar chart, I think, is really important, and this talks about what's going on currently and how over the last 3 years, how the pandemic has really affected our economy, and how this builds into how we think about our strategic plan and how we strategize going forward. So essentially, the red bar represents the jobs lost from February 2020 to May 2020, so that 3-month period. The blue bar is the number of jobs gained from May to present. Okay? If the blue bar is longer than the red bar, you get a green label on the left-hand axis. If you look at the top one, it says 26,400. That's the number of jobs were above the pre-pandemic peak. But the detail, what's going on under the hood, is really important here. If you look at the leisure and hospitality industry, it's still down 19,000, as I'd mentioned before, but transportation and warehousing is up almost 21,000, construction's up 8,800, manufacturing's up 8,000, professional and technical services up 5,700. What this means is that there's a natural evolution, the dynamics, because of Nevada's comparative advantage, that's creating a wind at our back that creates an opportunity for economic development to put up the sails and gain traction. Okay? And so we'll talk about that in a little bit. I mean, especially when you think about the logistics and operation, transportation, warehousing, and distribution. If you think about how non-store retail sales picked up during the pandemic, so much of what flowed through southern Nevada from the Port of Los Angeles, Port of Long Beach, we took advantage of. And so that's where we're seeing a shift in this industry base that's going forward. So next slide. All of this data and a whole lot more is part of what went into and sets the stage for our new strategic plan, our 5-year strategic plan. We just finalized it. It's on our website. We're going to post it probably this week or next week. There'll be a press announcement, but if you want to go to our website, it's posted there. You want to look at it now. And then it'll be part of our annual report that's going to come out probably within a week, 10 days as well. So the title of this is of our strategic plan is Realizing Nevada's Electric, Innovative, and Connected Future. We wanted to keep this really bread and butter strategic plan where you think about typical vision, mission, goals, strategies, tactics, all the rest of that. It's a 5-year comprehensive economic development strategy where the baseline is structured according to what the Economic Development Administration recognizes for grant application. Huge advantage of that is anybody in the state can take our CEDS and use it for EDA grant applications. So local communities, RDAs, things like that, if they want to apply for an EDA grant, they can do it under the umbrella of GoEd CEDS. So that was part of it, as well as how it transcends across administrations and brings in all of the things that we do and working in coordination with our regional development authority partners. Our mission statement there, everything we try to do ties back into right, the high-paying jobs and great quality of life for all Nevadans. If it doesn't do that, we don't do it. So everything on this slide here pretty much outlines the table of contents with the components that are in the state plan. The first one there under economic and community assessment, that's where all the data and the stakeholder interviews and everything is built into this that identifies what our target industries are in the new state plan, which haven't shifted a lot from the previous state plans. There's a section in there about the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threat analysis, our our strategy and our action plan going forward, how we're going to measure our success and progress moving forward, and then a leadership plan for inclusive growth. So there's a section on that. Now, my last slide here before I close out this section are the strategic action steps, and they go back and they tie to what Director Burns was talking about a little bit earlier. Electric Nevada, that's going to be a priority for us, taking a huge advantage of this huge comparative advantage that the state of Nevada has in this lithium loop, this EV supply chain, and how do we build that out going forward? We have the unique opportunity to have everything from extractive mining to final demand auto manufacturing, and Nevada's the only place that really has that, at least in North America. So that's a huge advantage for us. How we build out solar-related projects, how we build out the utility connectivity, how we think about the rest of the EV infrastructure. Innovative Nevada, that really goes back to some of the work that's in our state small business credit initiative and the work that we've got going there, but it's much, much more than that to build a cohesive community for the innovation and entrepreneurial, the startup space, increase capital access for these individuals in these groups, working more closely with higher education on tech transfer, STEM development, and then water scarcity. I mean, that's one of the constraints and one of the challenges that we have, but we also can turn that into a huge opportunity as we think about this in the innovation space. And then the last one is Connected Nevada, and that's not just broadband, what's there at the bottom. What's more important is thinking again our proximity to California, where we think about multimodal, some of these multimodal inland ports, tech-ready industrial parks, things like that, upgrading rails. So without taking up too much more time, I will turn it back over to Director Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Potts. Again, Tom Burns for the record. We wanted to review our development tools and give you an overall overriding view of the GOED office. So one of our most basic tools that candidly isn't listed on this slide is RDAs. And I've been on this great job, which I'm very proud to have, for the last 14 days. And the one thing I've learned is we're not short of acronyms here at GOED. And so RDAs is Regional Development Authorities for those that haven't had the opportunity to deal with them. And those are our friends, our boots on the ground in geographic spots throughout the state of Nevada. So if you're in southern Nevada, you're probably familiar with LVGEA. Our version in northern Nevada, which has been very successful, is EDON. Those same type models exist throughout the state, and there are partners that communicate with us both opportunities that they are fielded directly and opportunities where we are able to give them assistance. As you can see, as we have economic and business tools that go forward, we have the opportunity to provide business expansion via tax abatement, some innovative economic bases such as the Knowledge Fund, Innovation Fund. We have global trade programs. There are programs that we administer for emerging small businesses. The Nevada Film Office resides in GOED. One of our assets is the WIN program. That allows us to use a tool for workforce training to be an incentive for folks to move to Nevada. So as we're having a conversation around why it's important for businesses to move to Nevada, and they look at us and say, well, we need some training specified to our industry or how we move forward in our industry, we have the ability to give grants and support innovative training that allows Nevadans to take on those jobs, earn higher wages. A great illustration is what goes on at Tesla. The wages, the training program that they have there through the community college is pretty exceptional and groundbreaking in Southern Nevada. Allows people that while they're going to college and getting training to make $19 an hour and step into wages and jobs that propel them forward as they continue to work in that area. We have Project Sandy, which is supporting and advancing Nevada's dislocated individuals. The rural development blocks, which bring some prosperity and a facelift in some cases to parts of rural Nevada. Part of our great charm and asset is being a Nevadan. And the rural entrepreneurship program as we move forward. One of the things we'd like to point out is the transparency that we exhibit on our website. Our website was voted or named to be the #1 website in our field as far as transparency in the United States. And I can pledge to you that my goal is to be transparent. I know there's some frustration as it relates around NDAs, and those are part of the process of going through this, but to the extent that we're not restricted by those, our goal is to be transparent as we go forward and work with you on bringing businesses to the state of Nevada. As we move forward, I'm going to introduce Chelsea Estep. Chelsea is a Business Development Director? Thank you. There we go. Thanks, Chelsea. Again, I'm new. So, Chelsea, if you would help us.
Absolutely. Chelsea Estep, for the record. As Director Burns mentioned, I am the Director of Business Development. I am located up here in the north, and my colleague Melanie Sheldon is the Director in the south. So I'm going to review some of our Nevada tax incentive fundamentals for all of you today. So Nevada is actually quite a unique state when it comes to tax incentives, and because we are so unique compared to our peers, there are a lot of really common and understandably so misconceptions about how our tax incentives function and some of the things that we can and cannot do. So this first slide is detailing the things that our incentives can do. So Nevada tax incentives are statutory. That means that we must follow the statute to a T. We cannot go outside of that statute. They are partial abatements, meaning we don't fully abate taxes. The companies that come here still are required to pay a certain level of those taxes, and again, the amount that they get abated goes down to our statute. They are required to sunset after a specific time frame, which means just that. They're not going to continue forever once they're approved. And once they sunset, they do pay full taxes. They are only available for companies that meet the eligibility standards that are prescribed in the statutes. Each of the companies approved are audited on a 2- and 5-year basis via the Department of Taxation. And they are vetted for positive economic impact. So each and every company that comes through our office, we run economic impact on them to make sure that they are going to provide a positive impact for Nevadans and your constituents. And they also all have a positive return on investment, which I'll talk about a little later in another slide. So some things that Nevada tax incentives are not. They're not a complete break from taxes. As I mentioned before, they are only abated for a portion of the taxes. They are not a check written directly to companies. We don't have a slush fund like many other states have available. We aren't able to sit down with companies and negotiate between the state and the company what they would like to get from us for tax abatements. It just goes down to what's in the statute. And they're not abated in perpetuity. Excuse me. Going on to our incentive timeline. So for each of our companies, they'll come to us either directly or through our regional development authority partners. And once they are ready to move forward with an application, that's when this timeline starts. So they will submit an application for us to review. Once we receive that application, we'll review it for completeness and for statutory compliance. And once those two things are met, we will present that to the board. A representative from the Regional Development Authority, that is the region that they're locating in, will present that application to the board for approval. Applications are due roughly 60 days prior to the upcoming board meeting. So if an applicant comes in right before the board meeting and we're unable to put them on the very next board meeting, we will put them on the following. Once a company is approved, they get to select their contract start date, and that start date can range anywhere from the date they applied up to a complete year past the time they were approved. And finally, the Department of Taxation will then audit that company on a 2- and 5-year basis after their start date. So if a company is deemed non-compliant, the Department of Taxation will begin the recapturing process. And on that note, how do we know companies are compliant? We want to make sure that the companies are providing the number of employees and capital investment that they promised that they would be able to deliver. So every 2 and 5 years, the Department of Taxation will audit these companies. And should they find that those companies are non-compliant, they will go through the recapturing process. So as of the end of 2022, the recapture rate was 97%, and it was only 97% because one company that was deemed non-compliant has yet to pay back their taxes. Unfortunately, that company is going through a bankruptcy, so I'm sure taxation will be able to recapture it soon. But so our standard abatement incentive package is by far our most used and popular abatement package. That is NRS 360.750. There are 90.3% of all of the abatements that we use are this particular standard abatement package. So there are 3 taxes that are included in our standard abatement suite. They are for sales and use tax, modified business tax, and personal property tax. The sales and use tax is a reduction in the rate as low as 2% for 2 years. For the MBT, it is a reduction of 50% of the 1.378% rate on quarterly wages exceeding $50,000, and that goes for 4 years. And finally, the personal property tax abatement is not to exceed 50% of the tax, and it is for 10 years. Moving on to eligibility for that standard abatement, they have a very strict set of criteria that each company must meet in order to be approved for those abatements that were listed on the previous slide. So the company must meet the weighted average wage for all employees, and that is provided by DETR. Each July, they will provide us a new average hourly wage for the state. They must either meet the requirements for employment or capital investment requirements, and those requirements differ whether the company would like to be based in an urban or a rural area. All companies must offer health insurance plan and cover 65% or more of the premium costs for their employees. They must generate more than 50% of revenue from the project from outside of the state, and that is so we can make sure that they're bringing money back into the state. They must maintain the business in Nevada for 5 years, and they must register pursuant to the laws of Nevada. So our wage requirements are actually tied to the unemployment rate. And the reason for this is because when the unemployment rate is really high, that means that that county is facing extreme economic duress. So we want to make sure that we encourage companies to locate in those areas that could use more employment during those times. So when the county rate is above 7%, we adjust the wage requirement. In order to receive a full abatement in a county that is 7% or greater, they must meet 85 to 99% of the statewide hourly wage. If it's below 7%, they have to meet the statewide hourly wage. We also have a reduced abatement for wages that are below the statewide average hourly wage. To receive the reduced abatement when the unemployment rate is good, below 7%, they have to meet that 85 to 99% threshold. If they're below that, they're ineligible. If it's 7% or greater, then to get a reduced abatement, they must meet the 70 to 84% statewide hourly wage. Another important thing to mention on this is county unemployment rates are not seasonally adjusted, which means they don't account for the normal fluctuations during the season. For instance, Las Vegas will have a higher unemployment rate or a lower unemployment rate in the summer when the pools are open. So To account for that, the county unemployment rate is used a 12-month moving average to get rid of those normal seasonal swings. Moving on to our employment and capital investment requirements for our standard abatement. For rural areas, that is going to be all of the counties except for Washoe County and Clark County. A new company must have 10 employees, or they must have $1 million in capital investment if they are manufacturing, or $250,000 for all other types of establishments. It's important to note if they were to meet the capital investment but not the employment, they have to have at least 6 employees to be eligible. If they do not have 6 employees, they are not eligible. For urban areas, a new company must have 50 employees, less than 10 are ineligible, and capital investment must be $5 million for manufacturing or $1 million for all other establishments. Expansions have a little bit different rules. So in rural areas, an expanded company needs the greater of 10% of current payroll or 6 employees. In urban areas, it's 10% or 25 employees. And then capital investment is just 20% of current tangible personal property, whether they be manufacturing or any other establishment. So I'm sure as you're all aware, we do have some additional abatement programs. This slide is here really just to show the usage rates more than anything else. Aviation and data center are by far the most popular, aside from real property, which is kind of a different thing, but I'll get to that in a second. So aviation and data centers make up 6.1% and 2.5% of our use, respectively. The real property recycling abatement can be stacked on top of the standard abatement. 4% of companies have used that. They have to be doing very specific types of manufacturing recycling in order to be able to qualify for that. And then, of course, there's the $1 billion and $3.5 billion abatements, and as of 2022, those both had a 0.4% usage rate. Jumping back to this side on how tax incentives have impacted Nevada, what I wanted to point out about this slide in particular is the return on investment. You can see here we have the standard abatement return on investment in blue and all others in red. The standard abatement does have a higher return on investment than all of the abatements combined. But do remember that 90% of all companies are using that standard abatement. And none of the abatements have a negative return on investment. So for every dollar abated, we get $2.46 back on average. And my last slide for you all today. So year 2011 to 2023 year to date in fiscal years, we have 26,510 contracted jobs. Our average hourly wage in 2023 year to date, which is now halfway over, is over $40. We've had 423 approved companies, 68% of them which are participating and compliant. And we've had $22.5 billion in capital investment. And although the $3.5 billion investment abatement is not well used, it does make up 50% of the capital investment that has occurred in our state. Thank you.
Thank you, Chelsea. Madam Chair, for the discussion on transferable tax credits, I'm going to ask Haley Owens to come forward. She and Melanie Sheldon are subject matter experts on this for Go Ed.
Thank you, Director Burns, and thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. As Director Burns stated, my name is Haley Owens. I'm the research manager at the Governor's Office of Economic Development, and today I'm here to talk about our transferable tax credit programs. Currently, we have 4 different types of transferable tax credits that our agency is involved in. I'm going to call each one of those just a program, and those are transferable tax credits for qualifying film productions, economic development transferable credits, transferable tax credits for qualifying projects with capital investment of at least $1 billion, And that is in line with the abatement program for those projects as well. And finally, transferable tax credits for qualifying projects with capital investment of at least $3.5 billion. I will note that that last one has sunsetted, so it's no longer active and we're no longer awarding tax credits for that. But I will have an overview of it because we did award tax credits for that program in the past.
So I'm just going to stop you just really quick. Can you just, you know, we've given acronyms to certain, can you just name what that abatement 3.5 billion actually is and who it applied to?
That was the, from the SB1 of the 2014 special session that Tesla utilized.
Thank you.
Thanks. And I will say the economic development transferable tax credits as well. It was before my time, but I think those evolved out of the Catalyst account, so that terminology might be more familiar to folks as well for that one. Okay, so this slide has a lot of information, but this is really kind of just a condensed overview of what I'm going to go through for each program and just kind of provide some key information for each of the tax credit programs, including the statute, when the program started, the end date for the program, if there is one, total credits available per fiscal year, and what we've approved and awarded to date. So the thing, what's in common with all of our transferable tax credit programs is that there are 4 taxes that they can be applied against, or I should say taxes and fees, and those are the same against all 4 programs. And so these tax credits can be used against the gaming percentage fee, which is administered by the Gaming Control Board, or the modified business tax, the bank branch excise tax, and the insurance premium tax. Those latter 3 are all administered by the Department of Taxation. So now I'm going to speak to each program in turn. I'll start with the transferable tax credits for qualifying film productions. These tax credits are the most utilized in terms of the number of awards we've had. Credits available statutorily are $10 million per fiscal year, but no more than $6 million per production. The program has no expiration. It did start initially as a pilot program, so it did have a sunset date, but in 2015 per SB 94, they took away that expiration. So it's an ongoing program. And so activity to date, we've awarded $22.6 million in these transferable tax credits over the past 8 fiscal years. And you can see we have some key stats for the economic impact from these tax credits in that table below, that first column with $152.8 million. Those are the total qualified production expenditures upon which the transferable tax credits are calculated. And so that's $152.8 million that has been spent on goods and services from Nevada businesses from these productions. So it has a pretty significant economic impact on the state. So next I'll turn to the transferable tax credits for economic development. There are $5 million in statute. There are $5 million worth of credits these available each fiscal year from fiscal year 2021. The program does not have an expiration date in statute, and the issued credits also do not have an expiration date in statute. And for approval, the executive director of GOED can approve these credits up to $100,000, but anything beyond that has to go before the GOED board. And then here we have references to the administrative code where you can find all the details about eligibility, what the agreement between GOED and the company involves, and also how we determine noncompliance default. But really, you can see on the next slide, we haven't awarded any of these credits since 2018. Or we have not approved any of these credits since 2018. When we approved credits in 2018, there's an award schedule where they can get scheduled out over several years when they meet their job and wage benchmarks, but none have been approved since 2018. And in the program's lifespan, only 7 companies have been approved for these transferable tax credits for a total of just under $5 million. But actual awards, as I said, which depend on meeting those benchmarks in the agreement, have been less than $1.5 million to date. So next I will go to the tax credits for capital investments of over $1 billion. This was from SB1 of the 2015 special session. In statute, there's $7.6 million worth of credits available per fiscal year, and not more than 38 overall over the entire lifespan of the program. And this program also does have a statutory expiration date. No credits may be approved under this program after fiscal year 2025. So after Well, as of July 1, 2025, none will be awarded. And also, awarded credits expire 4 years after the date of issuance. And these credits are calculated according to statute in the amount of $9,500 for each qualified employee up to 4,000 employees. And interestingly, just at the end of January, the Interim Finance Committee approved $2.1 million in these tax credits for Redwood Materials, and that is the first company that has ever been approved for these tax credits. And so, as the table shows, they've been approved, but they have not yet been awarded. And then finally, moving to the investment of $3.5 billion, this was these tax credits were approved and awarded to Tesla. This program has sunsetted in statute. There were up to $195 million in credits available, and all $195 million of those credits have been awarded to the company. And so that concludes my prepared remarks, but we can answer any questions if there are any.
And finally, Madam Chair, wanted to give you a brief overview of Tesla's continued commitment for investment in Nevada. As you probably have heard, the company committed to a $3.5 billion capital project out in the Tahoe Regional Industrial Park, which will consist of 2 factories, one to produce the semi-truck and battery type along those lines. This will provide 3,000 new jobs to northern Nevada. As you know, or as Haley just described, the abatements for transferable tax credits no longer exist, so that portion of any previous support will not be available. You can see that in Tesla's annual report, they have illustrated the projects and capital investment they intend to do in northern Nevada. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions for you or the committee, Madam Chair.
Thank you for your presentation. I will start with Senator Danyate.
Thank you so much, and I greatly appreciate this presentation. At least for me, I'm still new to this committee, so I'm just barely learning. Okay, so I have a few. It's a 2-parted question, so we'll start with the first part because I think this is an important clarification, at least for myself. Can we go to slide 7 or page 7? As they're doing that, I love charts. I love breaking down the data and the charts. So with regards to average hourly wage of participating in compliant companies, I guess my question is, do we subjugate as to what the development jobs are for the company and then the permanent jobs? So essentially, right, when a company moves into the state, there's construction jobs that are created that are at higher wages, but as they fully operate, the permanent jobs may have a different hourly wage. So do we differentiate between that? Is that something that we track?
Madam Chair, through you to Senator Donate. The only jobs that can be incentivised for a company are full-time permanent jobs on the company's payroll. The employees must be employed for at least 30 hours per week. They also must be eligible for health benefits. Oh, Melanie Sheldon for the record. Apologies, yes, the companies must also be eligible for health benefits as well. So it is very specific, but we don't actually incentivise any construction jobs or also any part-time jobs.
Okay, thank you. That was an important clarification, at least for what I'm actually going to be asking you. Let's go to page 27. This is the slide on standard abatement, eligibility, and overview. In terms of to be eligible for abatements in Nevada, companies have to follow these outline procedures that we have. Of course, the hourly wage is something that we look forward to. Have you noticed that other states have expanded? Are there trends that we're seeing in other states to also incorporate things like paid leave, FMLA, paid FMLA? Is that something that other states have looked at before they give abatements that we're starting to build, we're starting to qualify what an actual good job looks like?
Melanie Sheldon for the record, Madam Chair, through you to Senator Donate. There are other states are it's a very interesting mix. All 50 states offer incentives, and some of them will put higher value on different aspects of their incentive packages than others. So it is occurring in other states. I can name a few off the top of my head where they might incentivize more healthcare plans and things like that. It is certainly, we're constantly reevaluating our abatements for improvements and efficiencies. But at the moment, it is just as it stands in statute.
Thank you. And then, Madam Chair, I think this is more just of a personal statement. To conclude, the reasoning why I was asking those questions, I think that I love this presentation because we talk about what we need to do as a state to move forward and what we can do to encourage industries to continue to build more jobs. I think that is something that all of us can agree with. But I also reflect as to one of my annual favorite reports as chair of Senate HHS, and that is that unfortunately we do have some companies in this state, including Tesla, which we're going to be talking about today, that have employees and their dependents on Medicaid. And so as we look forward to potential changes and any abatements that get approved, I think that's an important conversation that needs to be highlighted. So thank you.
Senator Spearman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm either going to compliment myself or insult my colleague, Senator Donati, because we were thinking along the same lines. And I don't want to start where he left off, because it's not just Tesla, but there's some other large companies, and when they get abatements, regardless of what kind it is or for how long it is, if their employees, substantial percentage of their employees are on Medicaid, we pay twice. And that's not fair. And, many times, when you start talking about the T word, and people, taxes and fiscal responsibility, then there are a lot of overtures made, but the underlying piece about Medicaid, I think, is very important. And it's not just Medicaid, but it's with the increased housing costs and the cost of living that have happened during the pandemic. And that's something that I think we should really take a look at, because it really doesn't matter if you bring in 50,000 jobs if 20,000 of those people are on Medicaid or have to apply for SNAP. So, and that leads me to that's my first question. I think it's slide number 27. We talk about the number of jobs that would be coming in, standard abatement for eligibility. So it's been my experience that a lot of times, because I was here in the 14 and 15 special session, and I think there was someone else came in, they kind of all rolled together after a while. But companies will come in and say they're going to bring 7,000 jobs. That's great. Clap, clap, clap. But the question that I think we have to ask is, how long will those jobs be available? Because innovation and technology are expanding every nanosecond. And so bringing in 10,000 jobs, I think one of the questions we have to ask, how long will those jobs be available? Are we talking about 10,000 jobs for the next 2 years, and then 50% of the employees will be laid off because now they're going to robotics? So one of the things that I think we have got to be good stewards of is not just the reputation of Nevada in terms of a business-friendly state, but the reputation that we have for protecting the people that have to pick up the tab. Does that make sense to you? So if that hasn't been something that you have considered, I would strongly encourage you to look at that, because otherwise it's like, fooled you, and that's not right. So when we talk about standard eligibility, I'd really like to see that line. How long will those jobs be here? And how long will the good-paying jobs be here? How long will the full-time jobs be here? And then what kind of insurance? When I chaired HHS a couple of sessions ago, one of the things that we did was we put in statute what insurance really meant, because a lot of people were offering skinny plans. We're going to offer you, insurance, but it's going to cost you $800 a month, and you're only pulling in $1,200. So making sure that they understand that that is a part of the statute in Nevada. And then I want to go back to, when I came in, there was, someone was talking about,
Senator Spearman, would you like for them to answer any
oh,
one
I'm
of
sorry, yeah,
those?
I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm just going on, yeah. Okay,
Because
thank
I
you.
was like, wait a minute.
Okay, okay, yeah, okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. But I have a follow-up.
Thank you, Madam Chair, to the senator. I just thought it was a statement of policy, to be candid with you, and I'm open to that. Certainly, we do review. You'll notice that as part of it, we intend for those jobs to be here at least 5 years, the good-paying jobs, included in the numbers that you reference. And we share your concern over health insurance. That's in my previous life, that was my profession, so I understand where you're coming from as far as plans that may not be beneficial to the recipient, correct? And so the premiums the things that we have right now would relate to ACA compliant plans as they go forward. Does that provide clarification, ma'am? Very good.
So the next thing I want to talk is, so we talk a lot about electrification, and that's part of the energy mix, renewable portfolio standards. And up until about 10 years ago, people didn't know whether that was a 4-letter word or a 3-letter word. So electrification, in my opinion, cannot be the only thing that we're talking about when we start talking about energy, when we start talking about transportation. When you start talking about GHG, greenhouse gases, transportation accounts for about 42% of that. And so if we're only going to talk about electrifying highways, putting in charging stations, and doing all of those things, I think we do ourselves a disservice by not looking at other opportunities for renewable energy investment. And one of those opportunities that we're really not talking a whole lot about, at least in Nevada, and our neighbors to the west are running rings around us, and that's hydrogen fuel cells. And within the next decade, hydrogen fuel cell vehicles will be electrified, and that will make them the new hybrid. I'd like to see us consider that as we talk about economic development, because it's not talked about. And there's $8 billion with a B dollars in the Infrastructure Act for hydrogen fuel cells. But we're not talking about how we pull that down. How do we make use of it? And when we talk about making use of it, the question that I would have is, throughout everything in GOED, how do we monitor supply diversity? Because a lot of people made a lot of money during the COVID and different things, but a lot of our minority and small businesses, large businesses caught a cold, medium-sized businesses caught the flu, but BIPOC businesses got pneumonia. And so if we don't build in supply diversity throughout, and I'm asking this question specifically because I was in a government affairs meeting today, and someone was making comments where they were doing a presentation on, purchasing with the state. And if we don't have that as a requirement, then we do our citizens a disservice as well, because everybody has to come back from this, or nobody comes back from this. So that's a question. Where's supply diversity?
Madam Senator, Tom Burns, for the record. I wanted to let you know that within our office, that is a position that we're looking forward to in the upcoming budget that's been submitted as part of our budget, is addressing supply diversity. I just say it is candidly not necessarily directly addressed within the folks that receive our abatements, although we do look to things as far as being good corporate citizens and having those conversations around that with them. So it's not codified, but it's certainly part of the conversation you had. And to address the first question, if I may, was around hydrogen. That is a conversation we're starting to have in Southern Nevada more robustly. We have upcoming conversations with possibility of partnering with Arizona and some other folks in putting some infrastructure in place in our state. We did just recently have a company move to Southern Nevada that does provide
Air Liquide?
infrastructure. Yes, ma'am.
And so I'm excited to hear that, and that's one of the things that I've got two bills, so I will look forward to speaking to you all about those bills on hydrogen. And, you know, most people, when you start, and I think if we're talking about that, what we have to do is include some type of education. And when I say this, I'll know how old people are by the chuckles, the volume of the chuckles. When you say hydrogen, a lot of people still think 1976 Pinto. Okay, yeah, okay, I know how old you are. And so the education piece has got to go, I guess, first, because there's still some consternation, if you will, about how we use that, will we use that? And one of the reasons that I'm bringing one of the bills is because we already have a hydrogen fuel cell processing plant in Nevada. So we got to get our heads out of the sand and figure out what we're going to do with it. If they're going to make it, and they're going to truck it over to California. If they're trucking it over to California, that means that there must be some demand in California. And you have a lot of people moving from California into Nevada. 2035, Governor Newsom has said there'll be no more internal combustible new cars sold in California. So if we're not up to speed with that, soon we will fall behind. That leads me to, I heard somebody talk about bringing our education systems into alignment with technology. How are we doing that? Are we working at all with NSHE? We're working at all with K-12 to make sure that we're not approving courses to fix typewriters and telephone booths when everybody now has a handheld computer. So.
Madam Chair, to the Senator, Tom Burns, for the record. I was the one that was, I believe, speaking on education, and where we've really shown progress and really a great service to the citizens of the state of Nevada is when we've partnered with the community colleges here, most notably in northern Nevada, although we still certainly have those relationships with CSN. But as we, in northern Nevada through TMCC and western Nevada Community College, we've developed programs that address advanced manufacturing skills. And those programs that are available and provided to those employees. And certainly we have had those conversations and have those same partnerships available in Southern Nevada, again, through CSN and Nevada State College. We just haven't had the demand at this point to engage those, but certainly they're available.
So maybe this doesn't apply directly to the companies, but I heard, and I can't remember who it was, said something about good corporate citizens. Was that you? Who? Somebody. Yeah, somebody. And so we have a great need in this state to fund mental health. And there was a study that was recently released that many people who are recovering from COVID have also been identified to be suffering from PTSD. And so that exacerbates an already fragile system, mental health system, services system. Is there any way to make sure that we are, when we think about good corporate partners, we're looking at some of the things that the state needs to do, but we don't have the revenue to do right now? And again, it goes back to no new taxes, that's great, but if we got new problems, how are we going to pay for them with old money that doesn't measure up? So that's the question.
Madam Chairman, through you to Senator Neal, Melanie Sheldon for the record. Within GOED, we actually have a health sector industry specialist, and so his entire role is to work with health facilities, potential providers, looking at policy, especially looking at Medicare reimbursement policy within the state. And so I can state for a fact that he is working with several mental health providers at the moment. So it's certainly something on the radar, but absolutely agree, it's can't do enough in that space.
So, and that's good, but I'm speaking about those who are not in the healthcare sector. What can be done in terms of making sure we have the revenue necessary? Because some of the same people that will be bringing jobs here will have some people on their employee roles that will need the mental health services.
Madam Senator, is it all right if I go direct? Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Tom Burns, for the record, certainly at the pleasure of the legislature, we can enforce whatever taxes or fees that we have. And that's not something that's in place or a tool for us to use right now as we go forward. So we are kind of at the pleasure of the legislature at that point.
Thank you, Senator Spearman. And thank you for indulging that line of questioning. Senator Gansert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so I wanted to ask you some questions about Tesla. So they were under the SB 1 from 2014, which was $3.5 billion investment. That no longer exists. And we had talked about, wanting businesses to come here and to stay here and to have good jobs. And so now they've promised, I think, another $3.6 billion. Will that, as far as capital investment, will that fall under the standard abatement process now?
Chairman Neal, Senator Gansart, thank you for the question. Melanie Sheldon, for the record. The $3.5 billion investment abatement package does still exist, but it has had significant restructuring since its first inception. There are some certain sections that have been restructured, especially in the 2019 legislative session, that does, I guess, reduce the benefits to a company, but it does exist and it still is there in statute should a company wish to use that.
Thank you. But as part of the original package, there were the transferable tax credits, right? And those don't exist anymore.
Correct.
Right? And so when you look at that, I think on the chart, it was $195 million in transferable tax credits. So I think we're looking at a business who invested significantly and that we gave substantial credits. And some of those are running out. I think some are expiring in 24, something like $50 million worth of tax credits are going to be expiring. So, looking at these investments that we make, sometimes it's difficult. You have to ask the question, would this business exist here or not? And if it does exist here, how many taxes do we actually reap from that? And when I looked at and I don't know if you've done that comparison specifically around the 3.5 billion plus, the return on investment on that. And because there's a return on investment during the existing plan right now, but then there's going to be another 3.6 with significantly reduced abatements. So that longevity and bringing jobs, and so it'd be helpful to get those numbers, because now we've got a company that, they'll probably be here at least another 10 years if they're going to invest that much more, right? They're going to be in for $7 billion with high-paying jobs, and the tax abatements, I think, have far more than paid for themselves with the revenue brought to the region. But I don't know if you have any specific numbers on that and any forecasts on what this new investment of $3.6 billion would look like.
Madam Senator Tom Burns, for the record, if you look back on the investment that the state of Nevada made through its taxpayers and citizens, the investment was approximately $1.2 billion. That includes $195 million of transferable tax credits, as we've said, that are no longer available. The return on that investment to date is approximately $6.2 billion to the state of Nevada, either in capital expenditures or taxes and wages paid to the state of Nevada. We do not have any at this point. We're still in the process of preparing for our special session of GOED on March the 2nd to review the upcoming GOED matter, and don't have any numbers available for you at this point in time.
Thank you. And I think I'm doing the math somewhat right. If I look at 6.2 billion return on 1.2 billion, that's like a 5 times return. And you had said the standard abatements are 2.46. So we've got about a 5 times return, and that's under the current program. But if we're looking forward, it'll be, maybe you'll have a forecast on what it looks like when we don't have the transferable tax credits, which were $200 million of the 1.2, which is a little less than 20%, like 18% maybe. So you've actually taken that out of the equation. So we should expect to have more than a 5 times return on that investment. Would that be accurate?
Thank you, Senator Gansert, for the question. Chelsea Eastep for the record. So the 246 in return on investment was actually accounting for all of the abatements. So Tesla would have been wrapped up in that number. I certainly have done the work for the return investment just on Tesla. I don't have that number at hand. I would be very happy to get it to you. And we will have that dollar amount for the next project as well. We just don't have it quite yet.
That would be very helpful, because I think sometimes economic developments, people question whether we should make these investments in the abatements. But when you look at the return as far as jobs and the taxes we are reaping, because the company came here versus somewhere else, especially of that magnitude, I think it's incredibly important to understand the numbers. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any additional questions? So I have a few. So I'm going to piggyback on the Tesla question. So it was mentioned just a minute ago that I guess the taxes that are up for abatement were limited, and so therefore, I guess the pie is not as sweet. But I know that it was LSST, right, that was removed in 2019. So how can the local school support tax, the removal of it, reduce the sweetness of the pie, right? We took it out because we wanted to make sure the money, the taxes that were, they were going to go to education, basically. And so talk to me about that statement, because I want you to kind of clarify that and help me understand companies, I guess, because it's an assumption that a company may have said, I don't like the fact that LSST is no longer a part of the pie that you can abate. So talk to me about what you're hearing from companies on what is currently abatable.
Chairman Neal, and my apologies if that came across wrong. I was also referring to the transferable tax credits, also sunsetting on that program. With the LSST, I do not believe that causes any companies to complain, including Tesla this time when they understood that it had been removed from the package. There wasn't any adverse reaction on that. Companies do understand the reason why we do it, and that it's statutory and it's non-negotiable.
And then my follow-up to that is, Tesla's been here before. You're trying to figure out what the package is. I know that there have been requests seeking the information, but I guess what I'm trying to figure out, what in the statute, and this is for my education, so if it's a company that's been here before and they've received transferable credits and abatements, are they still under a confidentiality provision if we know that they've played already in the state?
Madam Chair, Tom Burns, for the record, we had this very issue addressed by our DAG, representative from the Attorney General's office, and he confirmed that confidentiality agreement still applies.
So, because from my viewpoint, it's a big deal, right, when a company comes back, and although we can say the investment is 3.6 instead of 3.5, when we know that the only way to make the pie or the economic activity to make sense is to abate more taxes. And so, because the only tool you have is the abatement. The credits are not there. So, at least for the purposes of this committee and the presentation that you've given us, how much of an abatement, or maybe it's an estimate, maybe you can give an average, maybe you can give it rounded up. Because for $3.5 billion is on the other end a $90 million abatement, a $100 million abatement, because I want to know, I want to know what they're asking for in return for that, to come back and then do that in the state of Nevada, right? And let me caveat this. When Tesla came, Trick expanded in ways that were unimaginable. We know that, we see that. But there were also negative impacts to the growth that could not be sustained by Trick, growth that could not be sustained by Washoe. And then there were super conversations, I remember in 2019, 2021, all of those areas trying to talk about how to reduce the impact to the tax revenue that they wanted to receive in their county or in their city, that was then abated because of the Trick proposal. So I'm super curious about the impact of this new Tesla arrangement because of what we saw were the negative effects counter to the positive effects of the trick investment.
Madam Chair, Tom Burns for the record, and I want to be, could you provide me clarity on your questions? Because I certainly want to answer it.
So I'll break it up.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
the first part is, if you could give me an average or an estimate of what you think those potential abatements are that you're giving to Tesla, because that's what I really, really want to know.
Fair enough. Again, Tom Burns for the record. To be clear, we're still under NDA, as I illustrated earlier. But there's been plenty of data that has been provided in the press as far as what prior abatements were, and I'm not aware of any legislative changes to what those are available, so that may be a good milestone to at least estimate off of.
Good to know. I'm going to ask you something, because I understand the tool. But if it was contemplated to give a little bit more oversight over abatement of taxes, meaning I understand that we created the GOED board and we gave a lot of power to GOED when I came into the building. But now there are conversations around, is it too much power to have to abate the taxes of the state without legislative oversight? What are your thoughts on that?
Madam Chair, Tom Burns for the record. Certainly, there are times as we review the fairly competitive arena that GOED plays in drawing businesses to Nevada as a whole. We experience conversations that really are 90-day break between when we're able to receive applications and when we're able to give an answer just from the GOED board is too long for them to wait. That in states like Arizona and Idaho and Utah, that it's not nearly that long to receive approval for that. So in many cases, that would take away a competitive edge, because as businesses wait, they are going to make decisions not in a vacuum, and probably not willing to wait for the legislature to meet or to come to those decisions. So certainly as we meet on daily regular business basis and try to conduct the business of bringing new businesses to new industry to Nevada, I think that would be a hindrance.
Thank you for that commentary on it being a hindrance. I think that, we're in a different space, where COVID hit us in a way where the legislature trying to control the purse, trying to think about revenues coming in, thinking about revenues that were not going to come in for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, weighed heavily on us in terms of where were we going to find the existing money, right? In an environment where you could not raise revenue because of what was happening in COVID. And so you could imagine that as a legislature that has to fund government, that question comes up about what is the appropriate balance in those powers, right? And how those powers are then manifested in a recession environment, and then in a crisis environment that no one anticipated occurring. And so I think it's something to consider and to think about, only because there might be some potential conversations this session in the future that examine that relationship and examine trying to figure out how to give the legislature a little bit more control over the purse, which is also tax, and how it's generated, how it's abated, in the future of 23. So it's just something to think about. But I want to ask another question. So there was a statement, and I think it was on a slide, that it was like, what abatements are not. And it said, they're not abated in perpetuity. True. And that's on slide 23. Well, what it brought to mind was something that I don't know is, under existing statute, we were allowed to expand companies. And there were several expansions that occurred, and then I believe it was 2019, we kind of clipped that. But how many companies actually expanded their abatement beyond the original company that came in, and now we know that there was an extension or a tacking of that abatement, and now we're maybe where we could have perceived it was 2032, now we're into 2042, 2052. Do you know how many companies received an expansion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chelsea Eastup for the record. I don't have the exact number on the number of employees who received an expansion after getting a new abatement. I can get that for you, certainly. What I will say is that companies receiving an expansion, they are only allowed that one time after getting the original abatement. So they can get the original, they can get an expansion abatement, and that's all they can receive.
So it was my understanding, and maybe Mr. Nakamoto can correct me, there were also subsidiary arms of the company, right, that were allowed to get an expansion under, because it was an umbrella. So that umbrella, I remember it was maybe more than one extension because the umbrella allowed for who was under the umbrella to expand. Am I remembering that right? Or it would be interesting to see that in a slide, because that helps us to see the lineage of those expanded abatement that came under the statute and how many companies that is. What is the expiration date of those abatements, or if they receive credit? Because I think that tells a fuller picture of what the statute gave power to perform. Make sense? Okay. Okay. So is it on that? Because I'm shifting to a. Okay. All right. And so I also wanted to talk about, I believe it was mentioned about the audit provision. This is the power to audit, which is the Nevada Department of Taxation on that two-year and 5-year mark. And it ties into the previous question on the expansion piece, whether or not there was an audit provision that applied to the expansion company as well. And do you have data on the expanded company in the 2 and 5-year mark where we have audit numbers to show, right? Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Chelsea Eastup for the record. Yes, we actually just released our biennial report, and that lists all of the audit results for every single company aside from Tesla, which has its own report. And that is new, expansion, every company that's ever received an abatement, so long as it's been time for them to have an audit. We do have those results from the department.
Thank you for that. And I think, my next question is on the moving average, the unemployment wage piece, but I think it's probably a better question for Potts. I'm almost positive it's probably a better question for Potts.
All right.
So I was wondering, and I believe it's on the beginning slides, when you talked about it's your page 9 where you were talking about the loss of jobs and the Las Vegas unemployment rate of 5.4%. And what I was wondering was, how come we don't disaggregate that employment data so that when we do that moving average, we can show what the subgroups are doing, right? Because you do have programs, some federal programs that I guess federally tell you to focus on disadvantaged communities and access to. So I just wondered that because, it's been in law since 2017, the disaggregate number of the subgroups, so we see how all are faring within the county. Can you answer that?
So there's a couple different questions that are going on here, and I'm going to have Chelsea help me too because Bob Potts for the record, to you, Senator Neal. A couple different things going on here. The moving average on the unemployment rate only applies to the abatement in counties where the unemployment rate is above or below 7%. Because at the county level, the unemployment rate only comes in at an unadjusted level. So you need to think about part-time hiring in December, you're going to have a lot lower unemployment rate than you would have because there's all these seasonal workers, right, coming in for the holidays and working, right? And then January it comes around, and then all of a sudden you're going to have a lot higher unemployment rate. Just 2 months, these are side-by-side months, right? So we have to use the 12-month moving average as we go through the meetings to make sure that it's an actual annual number. It's a seasonal number, and that's what a seasonally adjusted number. And that way we can make a fair evaluation of whether or not the abatement applies above or below 7%, because there's different eligibility requirements that go along with that, okay? So that's part of the question. That's a different thing. Now, when you talk about disaggregating by different cohorts, whether you're racial or ethnic groups or a level of education and all the rest of that, that's a very complex question because of how the unemployment rate data is collected. That comes off the American Community Survey, and the American Community Survey is very loosey-goosey, if I can use that term, because it's done over a period of years, and so you have there's always a lag time that goes in with it, and when you're in high-growth areas, it's much more blurred than it is in slow-growth areas. Now, we work very closely with the Research and Analysis Division over at DETR to talk about those, you know, what's going on with these different cohorts, whether it's race and ethnicity or gender, different smaller areas, things like that. Be great to get to it. The problem is just getting the sample size up large enough so that you have reliable statistics.
Thank you for that, because I asked that question, and I'm glad you gave that in a two-part answer, because I look at the DETR data a lot. But there are counties in the north who have high cohort unemployment numbers, and they're close to TRIC, or they're close to some of these centers of economic development. And so when we talk about, I guess, outreach, engagement, who's working, who's not working within some of the rural counties, the numbers are high for some of those cohorts. When we talk about tribes, when we talk about Latino communities that happen to live within those communities. And so when you talk about, you know, if it's above 7 or below 7, that's why I wanted to know, how are those cohorts evaluated when we talk about that a new company has moved in and provided all this economic opportunity, but yet we can still see, you know, a 13.6 unemployment rate when we start getting into some counties that where they are residing. And I think that matters, right? Because we're not just doing economic development for some. We're trying to make sure that all of those people who live, citizens of Nevada who live within a rural county, can participate in the economic development that we have brought to the table, right? Yes. Okay. So that's why I was asking that. And I'll let Senator Gansert go, because I have like 3 more questions.
Thank you, and I appreciate you highlighting that the new abatement request, or the application for the $3.6 billion, doesn't have the 2.6% LSST, so 100% of the education portion of the sales and use tax will be paid with the investment that's being made, over $3.5 billion, as well as there's no transferable tax credits. Is that correct?
Senator Gansert, Tom Burns for the record. Yeah, that's correct, Senator.
Thank you. So they'll have 100% investment in the education portion moving forward. And then, you know, I was looking at page 11 when you looked at the diversity index, and essentially when you look at Washoe County, it's above 80%, and then you look at Clark, it's 51 to 80%. And so my question is about, and I'm not sure how much you know about it yet because it's just sort of being introduced, the new Nevada Way Fund, which could have as much as $313 million to start. When you look at Clark County, it has significant infrastructure needs to help with economic development and diversification. So how do you view that fund as far as its ability to help with diversification in Southern Nevada when you have potentially a pot of $313 million? Thank you.
Madam Senator, Tom Burns for the record. Certainly, as we look at the assets and the resources that are in Southern Nevada, we have some challenges around land and the infrastructure that relates to those parcels as we have discussions with companies that would entertain moving to southern Nevada for various reasons, whether it's its location as being close to Southern California, being on the I-15 corridor, those kinds of great assets. There are challenges around those pieces of land as they don't have infrastructure and aren't ready for use. And that presents opportunities for those folks that we compete against in Arizona, Utah, Southern California, and they have been hindrances to us going forward. So the ability to invest in those places would be a huge asset to bringing those jobs to Southern Nevada.
Thank you. And you don't have access to any funds like this at that magnitude, right? So like over $300 million to be able to use that for infrastructure. And I understand it has to be leveraged too, but does that move the needle in Southern Nevada to enable greater diversification?
So for the record, Bob Potts to you, Senator Gansert. I think this would make a huge difference. I mean, you know, I talked in my presentation a little bit about the difference between the regional economies in our state and what's happened in the north. You could, you know, I mean, and I'll just say this, you could argue that at some level it's a community that's trying to catch up with the economy up in the north. How do we figure out how to do that and take that model and translate it down into the south? If we had there's an amazing opportunity that we have in Southern Nevada right now. We just don't have a place for folks to land in the magnitude that they want to land. We find ourselves uniquely positioned to be within a day's drive of California suppliers and markets. We just need a place for these folks to land. So if we could have a tool, an asset to help us build that capacity out, I think would be hugely helpful.
Thank you. When you talk about a place to land, you mean the infrastructure is not available for the types of industries that want to come to Southern Nevada right now. And so we really need to be able to use some state funds to match, to be able to leverage, to provide that infrastructure.
Yes, for the record, Bob Potts, yes, I would agree with that. We do not have the infrastructure necessary to do the kind of growth and expansion that we need in Southern Nevada, and it would happen if it was there.
And this new Nevada Way Fund would help that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Senator Gignante.
Thank you so much. Promise this is my last question because we're getting to it. Yeah. You know, in talking about the expansion of abatements and for folks that look at it as part of that policy tool to expand some of the work that they're doing in the state, I'm just going to ask you, quite frankly, do you believe it's fair to, when there are organizations or companies that seek those expansion of abatements, is it fair to disqualify them if we notice during their application process that perhaps they're not paying those good jobs and that they're leading folks onto Medicaid or some of the proposals that we talked about today? Is that a fair assessment that could potentially the legislature could take on?
Senator Tom Burns, for the record. To be clear, as we said earlier, much of our process is tied up or is codified in state legislature. So we need to follow those laws as we go forward. If you're not following the recommendations of, in other words, you're not providing those good jobs, if you're not doing your end of the deal, I guess I will tell you, I will find out, but I don't know the answer as to my remedies as to providing further abatements on expansion. But to be clear, what expansion is not expansion of a previous abatement. It relates to the project that's being proposed at that point in time, and so it would be incremental money being spent in our state versus extending an abatement from a prior project.
Great, thank you. And again, just to make a general statement as we're getting close to the end of this, you know, I think for me personally, and perhaps this is an opinion that might be shared by other legislators as well, you know, I do sense some level of hesitancy and perhaps even worrisome. I understand the process of an NDA and some of the work that you guys are doing, and it's not a criticism towards your administration or to any one individual. I think it's more so of the process. But, you know, I believe that as a legislature, you know, the taxpayers have entrusted us with the responsibility, and when there is a magnitude and there's not full disclosure for the general public to properly vet a proposal with the general expansions that we are going to discuss in the near term, you know, I think that's something that we have to discuss this upcoming session, and I hope that there's some sort of remedy in the long term for it. And I think that's just a personal statement. So thank you so much, Chair.
Senator Spearman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of things. Ms. Burns, you mentioned the time differentiation if a company if you're negotiating with a company and we can't get an answer within a certain period of time, they might decide to go elsewhere. So here's my question. We're negotiating. Are we looking at everything that's on the table that we have, that we know some of the other places in consideration may not have? And I'll use Tesla as an example. I think that they're the only place in North America that has more lithium than Nevada is Brazil. So you can relocate any place you want to in the U.S., but you're going to have a transportation cost that you can't control because you're still going to have to come here to get it. And so, in my mind, we were never competing against anyone else because this is where you have to get it. So in the vetting process, are you looking at the things that we have here in Nevada that company needs and no one else has, and balancing that with the fixed cost versus the variable cost, that it makes more sense, the bottom line makes more sense to come here. Does that make sense to you?
Sure.
And the last thing I'll say is, that's a very good reason why we ought to be having annual sessions.
Thank you, Madam Senator. Tom Burns for the record. I'll let the people of the state of Nevada address your last remark, and that's up to them. As we relate, so to be clear, just a little bit of my history. I grew up in Nevada. I've lived here 52 years. I attended public school in Southern Nevada. I attended the University of Nevada, Reno. I raised my children in Southern Nevada. And so I have a vested interest in the best interest of the people that I live around. And so certainly in my livelihood prior to stepping into this role was the ability to negotiate and make sure that we were comparing, that my clients were in the most competitive atmosphere. And so clearly, as we move forward with anybody, we need to compare the assets and opportunities that are available wherever they're at, whoever we're competing against. And just a small point of clarification, because Senator, I had the same thought you did about lithium. And then I didn't know that all lithium that's mined in the state of Nevada has to be shipped off to China to be processed. So when it comes back, it doesn't matter where it lands, it has to be shipped somewhere. So, but clearly, we need to make sure that we make sure that the assets of Nevada are brought to the forefront, and all of those things. Again, our location to California, our abilities along the corridors are all things that we tout. I have very talented people that are much smarter and very dedicated to the state of Nevada that are sitting behind me right now, and those are things they bring up on a regular basis.
Thank you. So I have like 2.5 questions. So on slide 13, this is the Southern Nevada industry base, and I guess it would apply to, it's really about the industry sectors. So I just remember when we adopted the industry sectors, we also had an other category. And I've focused on the other category for a really long time because we have a lot of small businesses that are in other. And I'm wondering, how are we moving the tools and the resources that we have for the other category? I know we got the SSBI, BCI, Small Business Credit Initiative, federal dollars, and then there are some categories in there in the Invest Nevada where, okay, so it's under 500 employees, and there's another program if you're under 100 employees. But how is that performing? How is that working for the other businesses that don't fall into these sectors?
So if you think about how, for the record, Bob Potts to you, Senator Neal, if you think about strategic economic development, the target sectors that we focus on are thinking about those where you have comparative advantage, where it's actually growing like it shows in this chart, where it's growing up and to the right? And you also think in terms of export-based industries. And what I mean by that are companies that sell their goods and services outside of the region so that the money flows back in. And as the money flows back in, it starts supporting and growing all of the small businesses in the secondary industries, healthcare, car dealerships, drugstores, barber shops, all of those. the more that the whole point of what we're trying to do is to raise the level for everybody by bringing in industries and companies that actually do that for us. So I'll go back to the original, because it was back in the day, I think there was 13 different target sectors. That was pushed way back to 7, and I think that that's where the shift was made at that time. So for instance, I mentioned natural resources earlier. That includes clean energy, it includes water technology, and it includes agriculture.
Thank you for that. So then that takes me to the half of that. The SSTR program is, the way that I've read it, or maybe this is what I wanted it to do. I wanted it to focus on small businesses that were trying to do some R&D, or they had some technological innovation, but they were homegrown Nevada-based businesses. And what I hear more often than not is, how do I access it? How do I even engage with that program? Like, how can I become eligible? How can I get in front of GoEd to see if if the product that I'm developing as a small Nevada business fits into this SSTR or the SSBIR? Like, and I know that you guys engage in community events, high level community events. But how do we make the regular Nevada business that wants to feel that the GoEd relationship is a personal relationship that they can have to understand how to use that, or at least transfer piece, which has been around probably before you were even got there, Mr. Potts. Like, I remember, you've been there for a while. But I'm just saying, I remember reading some stuff in the early 90s when we were trying just to build relationships with Japan, right? And try to share products and information and allow companies to move. So can you talk about that?
So for the record, Bob Potts, you covered a lot of geography there. And as it turns out, Sunday was my 11-year anniversary. So if you go back to the day, it was Steve Hill that came in on November, and then there was our aerospace and defense guy, and then there was me. And then Mr. Chris Sanchez, who's our deputy in the South, who's on screen there as well. So as far as SBIR and STTR, that tells you how I know enough about that to truly be dangerous. I do know that Karsten Heise in our office, that's a space that he's working in, and I think what we're going to find with this SSBCI, this SSBCI version 2, this $113 million over the 3 tranches it's going to roll in, that's part of what he's planning to operationalize out and make it more accessible. I would agree. I think there's a misconception with GoEd that just because we're another executive branch agency that we're as big as BNI or we're as big as Dieter. We're 40 FTEs. And then with state unemployment where it is, we're less than that right now. So anyways, there's a lot to do. And so we truly, truly do depend on our partnerships with the folks at Dieter, with the folks at BNI. And so when we work with the Small Business Advocacy Center, when we're trying to set up relationships with the Lieutenant Governor and the Small Business Ombudsman, this is a place and an opportunity for us to leverage those things going forward, especially with some of the new assets that have been made available to us going forward. So hope that helps.
Yeah, it does. And thank you for that. And my final question, inland ports, you have it on page 17. So that passed, I believe, what was that, 2015 we did inland port legislation? And I see here you have multimodal inland port. And I guess it would be good for the record, how have we advanced? I know that there were conversations around COVID changed all kinds of things, right? We had backup in California. There were freight backup just in, I think it's, I'm thinking it's a beach city, Long Beach. There we go. But what are we doing with inland ports, and how are we making this work with Oregon, Utah? I know we were thinking at one point how to get some movement from SAC to here.
So for the record, Bob Potts, what I'm going to do is I'm going to defer to Chris Sanchez, who's down in our southern office and at the mic, to answer that. That's his area of expertise.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for the question, Chair Neal. So this is an area that we've been focused on for quite some time now, and you're exactly right. I think the first inland port study was done in 2011. Things have changed significantly since the pandemic in 2020. We have been working with the Port of Long Beach as well as the Inland Port Authority in Utah. One of the things that we are seeking to ensure is that Nevada does not continue to be a pass-through through which freight moves to recognize economic value in other places. In order to do that, we have to understand the ecosystem around us in the Southwest and where our value proposition is to the ocean carriers and what our value proposition is to industry. And we are working to define that. My colleagues mentioned earlier that lack of infrastructure. This, for me, is one of the most important questions as we look at the strategy around Southern Nevada and what we could be in that ecosystem and the types of infrastructure that we have to invest in to ensure that we're relevant over the next coming decade. We do have an opportunity, but we've got to be very thoughtful and methodical in how we realize that opportunity in terms of what we do with our infrastructure, what we do with our available land, what we do with land that could be available should it enter into the auction process through BLM. And so one of the things to keep in mind, 70% of the freight that moves through Nevada is coming from or going to California. We have 88 warehouses in the state adjacent to rail with only one using rail. We have about half the rail available now than we did 100 years ago. That's typical across the country, by the way, but it is yet another opportunity for us if we're thinking strategically about how freight moves through the state. Traditional inland port models will not work for us in Nevada, especially in the south, because we don't export enough goods. But we do have the ability to generate a hybrid, and one of the ways that we're working to do that is working with the Port of Long Beach to understand where their pressure points are, their pain points, how we can alleviate those pressure points, as well as how freight can move north to south throughout our state. But one of the things that we're looking at very much right now is kind of all modes. What if we invested in rail? What would that look like? How do we take advantage of the federal programs that are existing right now for grants to support these initiatives? And then, as I had said, defining our role moving forward in that ecosystem for freight movement.
Thank you for that. And each step of the way, we are still doing, and no slight to you, Mr. Burns, we are still adapting to the water conservation piece that Director Brown had implemented before he left to make sure that whatever we do is thinking about our water or lack thereof.
Chair Neal, thank you for the question. Absolutely. We're working with SNWA and the Las Vegas Valley Water District. We're trying to quantify the impact that a company may have in terms of their economic value versus their water usage. This is an area that we're pioneering, frankly. This is not done in any other locality in the country that we can identify, and that is incorporating water consumption into economic development decisions. We have a tremendous advantage in that we are leading in this area globally. I think many of the committee members may know that Southern Nevada Water Authority is one of the most efficient water users in the world in terms of their recycling. One of the things that's critical in this area is making sure that we invest in infrastructure that will support the return credits. So the pipeline that's being built out to Apex, the Horizon Lateral that is yet to be funded that will be essential to all growth in the South Valley, south of the M Resort. That project will be critical as we move forward. But we absolutely are considering water consumption. And the last piece of this also is water technology and how we can bring innovative companies to the state and the region to help us identify solutions to these issues as well.
Thank you for that. And so no additional questions. I want to thank you, Mr. Burns. I had never met you. I had never seen you, actually. I wouldn't have been able to point you out. But I'm glad I met you. And I appreciate you indulging us with this line of questions. And hopefully we'll become friends.
Madam Chair, I look forward to that. I did find out that Chelsea may be able to provide some clarification around the Medicaid question before we break, and I thought we'd give you that opportunity.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chelsea Eastup for the record. So I just wanted to clarify initially. So our health insurance plans that we require have to meet a specific set of criteria, right? So they have to offer ambulatory care. They have to offer care that allows for women to deliver their babies in hospitals and be covered for that. They have to cover medications, pediatric dental, those things, right? Those Affordable Care Act items are the standard that we hold them to. And we require that they pay 65%. And I do want to say that a majority of our companies do cover more than that, but the standard is 65%. That's what we require. So I want you to keep in mind that that is only for the full-time employees that we are allowed to count for them to be abated. So that doesn't mean that they're not able to hire seasonal employees or part-time employees. It's just that those employees may not be eligible, even by the company standards, to get that health insurance. And so unfortunately, that may be how they end up outside of that company's healthcare insurance system. And I think a useful way to think about this is our own state employment, right? So we offer really inexpensive healthcare insurance, but we also are very high up on that Medicaid list, which is unfortunate, but it's true. So I think that has helped centered for me when I was doing research on this a year or two ago. Reasons why employees might end up on Medicaid. It's a lot more in-depth than one might think on the surface than just low wages. I hope that helps.
Thank you for that. Is that in the annual report, or is that something that you can send in writing to the committee?
Certainly. It's not included in the biennial report, no. And they, I don't believe that taxation looks at healthcare, but I certainly can get you more information on that in writing, yes.
Okay, thank
Oh,
you.
and if I may, just one
Go
more
ahead.
item on small businesses. I just did this research yesterday, so I thought it might be interesting. You may be interested in it. 81% of the companies that do receive abatements have 100 employees or less. So, and 54% have 50 employees or less. So it's not all just big businesses that we are helping with our abatements. Thank you.
That's good to know. Probably should tell that story more.
I think you are correct.
Okay, so thank you guys for spending your afternoon with us. We appreciate it. And we will go ahead and close this presentation, and I will open up for public comment. Mr. Potts, do you have a comment?
I just wanted to say thank you.
I so like you, Mr. Potts. All right, we will go ahead and close this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we will open up for public comment. Is there anyone here in Vegas for public comment? You're probably, or is there anyone here in Carson City for public comment? Come to the table. Okay, is there anyone on the phone for public comment?
Thank you, Chair. The public line is open and working. However, there are no callers at this time.
Okay, thank you for that. So we will go ahead and adjourn Senate Committee on Revenue.